It began quietly. No announcements, no headlines, no photographs. The President of the United States simply vanished. For nearly 5 days, the most powerful man in the country was nowhere to be found. No official explanation, no public statement, not even a whisper from the White House press room. Washington buzzed with questions. Reporters lingered outside the executive mansion. Some claimed President Grover Cleveland had fallen ill. Others suggested a nervous breakdown. A few whispered the unthinkable, that the president might already be dead. But the truth was stranger than any rumor that circulated through the streets. In the summer of 1893, America's leader boarded a yacht under cover of night. What happened aboard that vessel would remain one of the best-kept secrets in American history, an operation that saved a man's life and perhaps an entire nation's confidence. The year was 1893, a time of gilded opulence and quiet despair. Railroads stretched across the continent, fortunes were made overnight, and cities gleamed under the electric light. But beneath the surface, the economy was rotting. In May, a major railroad company, the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, collapsed under crushing debt. Banks followed, factories shuttered, farmers went broke, the stock market trembled, then began to fall apart. It became known as the Panic of 1893, and it was devastating. Tens of thousands of businesses closed, unemployment soared, breadlines formed. Men who once owned companies now stood on street corners selling apples. And at the center of this storm stood President Grover Cleveland, America's 22nd and 24th president. He was known for his stern sense of honesty, his large frame, his bushy mustache, and his quiet stubbornness. Cleveland had been elected on a promise to restore trust in government and stability in the economy. But the weight of that promise was growing heavier every day. Then came something he didn't expect. A personal crisis that threatened to destroy everything he stood for. In early June of 1893, Cleveland began to feel a strange pain inside his mouth. It was small at first, a rough patch on the roof near his upper left jaw. But within weeks, it grew into a hard lump. When he ran his tongue over it, the mass felt like a stone pressing against his cheek. Eating became uncomfortable. Speaking grew painful. Still, Cleveland told no one outside his closest circle. He was a man of privacy and pride, the type who refused to show weakness. Finally, one evening, he allowed his personal physician, Dr. Joseph Bryant, to take a look. Bryant examined the lesion carefully, and what he saw drained the color from his face. This wasn't just a sore. It was malignant, almost certainly cancer. In the 1890s, that word carried a near-certain death sentence. Medical science had few tools to fight it. Surgery was risky, infection was common, and anesthesia was primitive. But the bigger problem wasn't just medical, it was political. If news of the president's cancer leaked to the press, it could devastate public confidence. The nation was already teetering on the edge of economic ruin. If the president appeared weak or dying, the financial panic could spiral into full collapse. Cleveland understood this better than anyone. He made a decision. The public could never know. Plans were made in absolute secrecy. Dr. Bryant gathered a small team of trusted surgeons, each sworn to silence. They chose not a hospital, which would have been impossible to conceal, but a private yacht owned by his friend Elias Benedict, a wealthy banker. The yacht was named the Oneida. On the evening of June 30th, 1893, the Oneida slipped quietly up the East River, leaving Manhattan behind. No reporters followed. No one watching the docks knew that the President of the United States was aboard. Inside, the yacht's interior was transformed into a makeshift operating room. Furniture was cleared away. Windows were covered with sheets. A chair was bolted to the floor. It would serve as the operating table. Cleveland arrived wearing a soft hat pulled low over his eyes. He greeted the surgeons with his usual calm, though those who were there later said his face looked pale and drawn. As the yacht drifted toward Long Island Sound, the president sat back in the chair and nodded. "Let's get on with it," he said. The year was 1893, decades before modern anesthesia, sterile gloves, or antibiotics. Cleveland was given ether to dull the pain. Dr. Bryant and his team worked quickly, using handheld instruments under the dim light of oil lamps and the gentle rocking of the yacht. For nearly 90 minutes they operated. They removed 5 teeth, a large portion of Cleveland's upper jaw, and most of the tumor, which had spread dangerously close to the bone. The procedure was brutal and delicate all at once. A single mistake could have killed the president instantly. Throughout the ordeal, the yacht's crew was ordered to keep the vessel steady. The engines ran low to reduce vibration. Above deck, the sound of surgical tools clinking echoed faintly against the wooden walls. By midnight, the operation was over. Cleveland was pale, weak, but alive.
The surgeons placed the removed tissue in a glass jar. It would later be preserved as a medical specimen. The president's mouth was packed with cotton, and his mustache was combed carefully to hide the swelling. He spent the next several days recovering aboard the yacht as it drifted quietly near Cape Cod. To the outside world, the president was simply on vacation. When Cleveland returned to Washington a few weeks later, reporters noticed he looked thinner, quieter, and spoke less. The White House issued a brief statement. The president has been treated for a minor dental condition. That was all. Behind the scenes, he wore a special rubber prosthetic made by dentist Dr. Casson Gibson, designed to fill the space where his upper jaw had been removed. It allowed him to speak normally, even deliver speeches, without anyone realizing the extent of the surgery. Not a word of the truth reached the public. The surgeons and crew aboard the Oneida kept their oath of silence. The press, lacking proof, eventually moved on to other stories. And just like that, one of the most daring cover-ups in American presidential history vanished from memory. But secrets never stay buried forever. In 1917, nearly 24 years later, one of the surgeons who had assisted in the operation, Dr. William Keene, finally told the full story in a medical journal. By then, Cleveland had long since passed away, and the nation he once led had changed dramatically. But the revelation shocked historians. A sitting president had undergone major surgery at sea in total secrecy, while the nation faced its worst financial panic, and not a single newspaper had uncovered it. The feat was almost unimaginable in an era obsessed with political scandal. Yet those who knew Cleveland best said he never regretted his decision. He believed that protecting public confidence was part of his duty, even if it meant lying by omission. To him, leadership meant sacrifice, and sometimes that sacrifice included the truth. When doctors removed Cleveland's tumor, they preserved it in alcohol and stored it away. Decades later, medical researchers examined what was left and confirmed it was a cancerous epithelioma, the kind that could have easily spread and killed him within months. The surgery, as crude as it was, likely saved his life. Historians have debated ever since whether the secrecy was justified. Some argue that Cleveland deceived the American people, that a democracy deserves transparency even in times of crisis. Others defend him, saying his silence protected the nation from further panic. But what remains undeniable is that the operation aboard the Oneida changed the way America viewed power, privacy, and truth. Grover Cleveland recovered fully and served out his second term. He later retired to his home in Princeton, New Jersey, where he lived quietly until his death in 1908. The men who operated on him never sought fame, and the yacht, Oneida, was eventually sold and forgotten. Yet the story of that night, the flickering lamps, the steady hands, the president asleep under ether, continues to drift through history like a ghost ship. It is a reminder that even the most powerful figures are bound by fear and mortality, that behind the marble halls and portraits, they are still human, frail, secretive, and desperate to protect the fragile illusion of control. In the end, Grover Cleveland returned to the White House as if nothing had happened. The panic faded, the economy recovered, and history moved on. But that silent voyage in 1893 remains a ghost story in the chronicles of power. A reminder that even the strongest leaders are human, and that sometimes the most powerful act of leadership is simply to disappear. Years later, a journalist who had once covered the Cleveland administration reflected on the story. "We thought we knew everything about the man, his stubbornness, his honesty, his strength. But perhaps his greatest act of strength was the one we never saw." The President's Vanishing Act remains one of the most astonishing and quietest episodes in American history. A secret carried by the tides, whispered only by those who were there that night on the dark waters of the East River. A nation in crisis, a leader in silence, and the secret that slept beneath the surface for nearly a quarter of a century. History remembers wars, speeches, and scandals, but sometimes the most extraordinary moments happen in silence. Grover Cleveland didn't fight a battle on a field or make a speech that echoed through time. He fought a battle inside himself, between duty and truth, fear and responsibility. When the country needed stability, he chose secrecy. When the world demanded answers, he offered calm. And when death crept too close, he faced it quietly, aboard a drifting yacht, under the veil of night. His Vanishing Act wasn't cowardice. It was conviction that the survival of a nation sometimes depends not on what is said, but on what is kept hidden. In the end, Grover Cleveland returned to the White House as if nothing had happened. The panic faded, the economy recovered, and history moved on. But that silent voyage in 1893 remains a ghost story in the chronicles of power. A reminder that even the strongest leaders are human, and that sometimes the most powerful act of leadership is simply to disappear.